Milo walked slowly through the tall trees of planet Rallin. The forest was quiet except for the soft sound of wind blowing through wide purple leaves. His boots crunched on the thick moss as he looked at the scanner in his hand. The device blinked green. No danger nearby, just trees, plants, and fresh air. He had been alone on this planet for 6 days. His mission was simple: explore and map the land for a future human base. Rallin had breathable air and water. It was a good place for life. Still, Milo knew it was not empty. He had seen signs of movement: broken branches, strange tracks, and pieces of cloth caught on bushes. Someone or something lived here. Today, something felt different. Milo noticed a thin line of black smoke rising between the trees. It was far but steady. He stopped walking. There were no volcanoes or factories here. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. Maybe friendly, maybe not. He turned off his scanner and moved carefully. He did not want to be seen. He walked low, stepping only where the ground looked soft. As he got closer, the smell of burning wood filled the air. The smoke grew thicker. Then he heard voices. Rough, deep voices that spoke in a language he did not know. Milo crawled behind a group of thick bushes and looked through the leaves. A small camp sat in the middle of a clearing. 5 large aliens stood around a fire pit. They had gray skin, short horns, and long arms with sharp claws. They looked like scavengers: dirty armor, old weapons, and no respect for life. Milo had seen this type before on other planets. They took what they wanted and left nothing behind. But what shocked him was what hung over the fire pit. A young alien girl, no older than a child, was tied up with ropes and hanging over the flames. Her fur was silver white. Her long rabbit-like ears drooped, and her thin legs kicked weakly. She was still alive, but her strength was fading. The fire below her crackled, and the ropes above creaked as they held her weight. The aliens laughed and threw bones into the fire. One of them poked at the flames with a stick. Another pulled on the rope, making the girl swing slightly. She let out a soft cry. They laughed again. Milo felt his hands clench. He had seen many cruel things in space. He had trained for war, for survival, for defense. But this was not survival. This was evil. He could not leave her there. He backed away from the bush and checked his gear. He had a knife, a flash bomb, and a rope. No guns, no drones. It had been a peaceful mission, until now. He sat under a tree and made a quick plan. The scavengers were relaxed. They didn't expect trouble. He would wait for night. He would use the flash bomb to distract them, then cut the girl down and run. The sun sank slowly, and the sky turned dark blue. The campfire still burned. The scavengers now sat around it, eating meat and drinking from metal cups. 2 of them were already sleeping. Milo moved silently through the trees and climbed one. From above, he had a clear view of the fire pit. He took out the flash bomb and set the timer. 10 seconds. He aimed it at the center of the camp. He dropped it. A bright white light exploded in the air. The sound was loud and sharp like thunder. The aliens shouted and covered their eyes. One fell over. Another dropped his cup. Milo jumped down and ran toward the fire pit. The girl was still tied. Her eyes opened weakly, confused and afraid. He didn't speak her language, but he looked into her eyes and whispered, "I've got you." He pulled out his knife and cut the rope. The girl fell into his arms. She was light, like carrying a child. Her fur was warm, but her body shook. From pain, the scavengers shouted behind him. One pointed, another reached for a weapon. Milo turned and ran into the forest, holding the girl close. Branches whipped past. The firelight faded behind them. The sound of footsteps followed for a while, then stopped. The scavengers were big and loud. They could not run far in the dark. Milo kept going until he reached a small, rocky cave hidden behind thick trees. He laid the girl down gently and used a heat blanket from his bag to warm her. Her breathing was slow but steady. Her eyes stayed open now. She looked at him with wonder and fear. Milo sat beside her. He had no translator, no way to explain who he was. So he smiled and nodded. He pulled out a water pack and held it to her lips. She drank slowly. The stars above the trees sparkled like diamonds. The forest was quiet again. But Milo's heart was still beating fast. He had saved a life, but danger was still near. The scavengers would not forget this. As the girl drifted into sleep, Milo looked up at the sky. He had come to map the land. Now he had a mission greater than that, and it had long ears and silver fur. The forest was quiet, but Milo did not rest. He sat near the mouth of the small cave, his knife in hand, eyes watching the dark trees. The rabbit girl slept behind him, wrapped in the heat blanket, her breathing soft and calm. She had survived the night, but that did not mean they were safe. Milo knew the scavengers would be searching for her. They had seen him. They would not forgive him for taking what they saw as theirs. He had no weapons except his knife and a few tools. No backup, no signal. His radio had broken on day 3. Help was far away, but Milo had something stronger than weapons. He had a reason to fight now. He looked back at the girl. Her silver fur glowed slightly in the moonlight. She was different from any species he had met. Her ears twitched even in sleep. She looked peaceful now, but her body was still weak. As the sun slowly rose, Milo stood up and checked his bag. He had 1 day's food left, a small bottle of water, rope, and a broken scanner. Not much. He would have to find water soon, maybe even food. But first, he needed to move. This cave was too open. If the scavengers sent drones, they would spot the heat signature. Milo leaned over and gently touched the girl's shoulder. Her eyes opened. She blinked a few times, then looked up at him. She sat up slowly, still weak, but alert. Milo smiled softly and tapped his chest. "Milo," he said. She tilted her head, ears twitching. Then she placed her hand on her chest. "Nera," she whispered. Milo nodded. He repeated her name with care. "Nera." "Okay, we have to go." She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She tried to stand, stumbled, and almost fell. Milo caught her and supported her with one arm. Her legs were still healing from the burns. Step by step, they left the cave. Milo moved slowly, watching every shadow, listening for any sound. Nera leaned on him, but stayed quiet. She was light and small. Her body shook, but her eyes stayed open. They walked for an hour, staying away from open spaces. Birds flew overhead. Strange vines curled from tree to tree. Milo found a stream and let Nera drink. He filled his bottle. The water was cold and clean. After they drank, Nera touched a plant nearby. She broke a red leaf and crushed it between her fingers, then rubbed the juice on her leg. Milo saw her relax. The juice must have helped with the pain. He looked at the plant and carefully took a few more leaves for later. As they moved again, Milo noticed something odd. Nera was no longer just following. She was leading. She pointed to a narrow path between 2 trees. The ground was dry, no footprints. She made a soft sound, something like a warning. Milo followed. This part of the forest was different. The trees were older. The light was dimmer. The wind made a low humming sound. Nera stopped suddenly and crouched. Milo dropped down beside her. Through the trees ahead, 2 scavenger drones floated above the ground. They were scanning the area, red lights flashing. Milo held his breath. If the drones saw them, they would send a signal to the camp. Nera reached into a pouch tied to her side. Milo hadn't noticed it before. She pulled out a small round seed glowing faintly blue. She placed it between her hands and whispered something in her own language. Then she rolled the seed into a small hollow in the tree next to her. The seed melted into the bark. The humming in the trees grew louder. Then the bark on nearby trees started to shift. Long branches moved like arms. A vine rose from the ground and coiled toward the drones. Milo watched in shock as the forest came alive. One vine whipped forward and grabbed the first drone, pulling it down and crushing it. The second drone tried to fly away, but a branch reached up and swatted it from the air like a fly. The noise stopped. The trees stilled again. Nara looked at Milo and gave a small nod. Milo stared at her with wide eyes. She had used a seed to call the forest itself. She was more than just a native. She had power here, he whispered. You're amazing. She didn't understand the words, but she smiled softly. They moved again. Nara led him to a place where the roots of a massive tree formed a shelter like a tent. It was hidden and dry. There was a small spring beside it. Milo set down his bag and helped her sit. She looked tired but calm. Milo collected some wood and made a small fire inside a ring of rocks. He gave her a food bar, and she sniffed it before tasting. Her nose twitched, but she ate it slowly. Milo took another and chewed in silence. After they ate, Milo pulled out a small screen from his bag and drew a few pictures with his finger. He showed a picture of her hanging over the fire, then one of him cutting the rope, then one of them walking together. Nara looked at the images and pointed at herself, then at him. She made a soft sound that could have been thanks. Milo smiled. He pointed to the picture again and said, Safe. I help. She nodded. Night came again. Nara lay beside the fire, eyes half closed. Milo stayed awake, watching the forest, thinking. He had come to explore this world. He had followed smoke out of curiosity, and now he had saved someone who was more than she seemed. He didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing clearly. He was not going to leave Nara behind. Not now, not ever. Morning sunlight passed through the leaves above. A few golden beams reached the forest floor where Milo and Nara sat near the spring. The night had been quiet. No drones. No scavenger footsteps. For now, they were safe. Milo sat cross-legged, near the fire, chewing a dry food bar. Nara was beside him, sitting on a thick root, dipping her burned feet into the cool water. Her silver fur was cleaner now, her breathing steady, her ears no longer drooping, but she still looked at Milo with careful eyes, trying to understand him. Milo pointed to himself again and said, Milo. Then he pointed to her and repeated, Nara. She nodded slowly. Milo smiled, then picked up a stick and started drawing in the dirt. First, he drew a small figure of himself with short hair. Then he added a simple spaceship. Then a long trail with trees. Then Nara, tied up above, a fire. He paused and looked at her. Nara's smile faded. Her hand touched her chest gently. Milo quickly wiped that part of the drawing and drew another picture. Her standing next to him, both of them walking together under trees. This time, she nodded with a soft smile. He wanted to ask her many things. Where was her home? What did those seeds do? How did she call the forest to life? But they had no words in common. They only had pictures, sounds, and trust. Nara stood slowly, testing her legs. She was stronger now. The red leaf she used yesterday had helped. Milo handed her his water bottle. She drank, then walked to a nearby plant. She picked another red leaf and handed it to him. Milo took it carefully. It was soft and smelled sweet. Nara pointed to her feet, then to the leaf, then to Milo's leg. She was teaching him. He folded the leaf and placed it in his bag. Thank you. He looked around. The trees stood tall and quiet. But Milo knew they couldn't stay here forever. The scavengers were still out there. The drones had not returned to camp. That meant the enemy would be suspicious. They would keep searching. Milo pulled out his small screen again and drew a new picture, a question mark above Nera's head, then a simple hut, a valley, a group of rabbit-eared people. He looked at her and tapped the screen. Home? Nera stared at the image for a moment, then nodded. Her eyes turned serious. She picked up the stick and drew her own image. First, a mountain, then a river flowing, down, then a group of tall trees in a circle. At the center, a large stone. Around it were many figures with ears like hers. She pointed in one direction, deeper into the forest. Milo stood up and checked his supplies. Almost no food left. One bottle of water. But if her home was near, maybe they could reach it before nightfall. He nodded. Let's go! They packed quickly. Nera moved better now, though she still limped slightly. She picked up a wooden stick to help her walk. Together, they left the safety of the roots and stepped back into the wild. The forest changed as they moved forward. The trees became thicker, their roots twisting like ropes. Some leaves shimmered under sunlight. Strange birds flew between branches, their wings flashing with color. Nera led the way, walking with quiet steps. She stopped often to listen, her ears turning left and right. At one point, she raised her hand to stop Milo. She crouched low and pointed to a patch of ground ahead. Milo looked closer. There were tracks, heavy boots. 5 or 6 people had passed through, scavengers. Nera motioned to go around. They stepped off the path and moved through thicker bushes. Milo had to duck under branches and climb over mossy logs, but they stayed hidden. After a while, the sound of running water filled the air. They reached a river with clear blue water and small glowing fish swimming in it. Nera smiled. She stepped into the water and washed her arms and face. Milo did the same. As they rested, Nera reached into her pouch again. She pulled out another glowing seed and handed it to Milo. He held it carefully. What is this? She tapped his chest and pointed to the trees. Then she made a soft humming sound, like the sound he had heard before when the forest came alive. Milo stared at the seed. It was warm in his hand. He didn't know how it worked, but it was powerful. A gift of trust. They crossed the river using a fallen log. On the other side, the forest felt different. The air smelled richer. Flowers bloomed in strange shapes. Milo saw statues made of stone hidden under vines, faces with long ears carved into rocks. This was Nera's land. She walked faster now, even with the limp. Her ears stood taller. Her eyes looked bright. But when they reached the top of a small hill, she stopped suddenly. Below, in the valley, smoke rose into the air. Milo stepped beside her and looked down. Ruins, burned huts, broken fences. The circle of trees she had drawn, half of them were black with fire. Scavenger marks were painted on the stones. The village was gone. Nera dropped to her knees, her hands pressed into the soil. She made no sound, but her eyes filled with tears. Milo knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak. Words meant nothing right now. After a few minutes, Nera stood. Her body shook, but she stood tall. She looked toward the valley and then to a small trail leading into the rocks. She motioned for Milo to follow. They walked down the path, past the broken village, into a cave hidden behind a curtain of roots. Inside, the air was cool, dark. But then Milo saw movement. A group of small figures stood deep inside the cave. They looked like Nera, long ears, silver or gray fur, soft eyes filled with pain and fear. One older female stepped forward. She had white fur and a walking stick made from crystal wood. Nera ran into her arms. The elder held her tight. Milo stepped back and let them speak. The sounds were soft, full of emotion. After a while, Nera turned to him and pointed to a symbol carved into the cave wall, a large tree with a glowing heart in the center. The elder looked at Milo and spoke slowly in broken human words. Heart. Root. She must go. Forest will listen. Milo didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing. The journey was not over. It had only just begun. The cave felt warm and safe. A small fire burned in the center while the survivors sat around it in silence. Nera stayed close to the elder, her head resting against her shoulder. The others, children, old ones, a few injured adults, watched, Milo with quiet curiosity. He was the only human they had ever seen, and yet Nera had brought him here like a protector. Milo sat near the edge of the group, resting his tired legs. His mind was full. The village was gone. Scavengers had taken everything. These people had nothing left. And still, they had not given up. Their eyes were filled with pain, but also something stronger, hope. The elder, whose name was Lyra, slowly stood and came toward Milo. She leaned on her crystal wood staff, each step slow but steady. When she stood in front of him, she looked into his eyes and placed her hand on her chest. "Friend," she said in a soft, rough voice. Milo nodded. "Friend." She pointed toward Nera, then to a mark carved into the stone wall behind her. The mark was a circle of roots, glowing with plant sap. Inside the circle was a heart-shaped seed. "The heart root," she said. Milo watched her trace the mark with her finger. "Protect us." But locked. She turned to Nera. "She go. Only her." Milo stood slowly. "What is it?" Lyra touched, the staff to the ground. "Old place, forest spirit. Test her, wake forest, save all." He didn't understand every word, but the meaning was clear. The heart root was real, and it could protect them. But only Nera could reach it. Only she could unlock it. Nera walked up beside him. She held the glowing seed he had seen before. Her hands were shaking a little, but her face was calm. Milo placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're strong." She nodded, then pointed to the cave entrance. She was ready. The path to the heart root lay beyond the cave, deeper into the mountain. Nera and Milo stepped into the dark passage, while the others stayed behind. Only the elder followed a short distance to show them the way. Soon, they came to a wide stone door covered in old carvings of trees, animals, and stars. At the center was a deep hole shaped like the glowing seed in Nera's hand. She stepped forward and gently placed the seed into the hole. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the stone glowed green. The carvings lit up like fireflies. The door slowly opened with a deep sound, revealing a tunnel made of living roots. The elder stopped at the door and touched Nera's face. "Be brave," she whispered. Nera entered alone. Milo watched as the door closed behind her, vines twisting, back into place. He sat down and waited. Minutes passed, then hours. The air grew still. Not even the sound of birds reached this deep. Suddenly, Milo felt something. The ground under him shook slightly. A soft hum rose in the roots around him. He stood and looked around, alert. Something was moving. Then he heard a noise. Fast footsteps. Branches breaking. He turned toward the tunnel behind them. Two scavengers rushed into view. They had followed the trail. Milo stepped back, pulling out his knife. The scavengers saw him and shouted something. One raised a short blaster. Milo ducked. As the weapon fired, the bolt hit the wall, sending sparks flying. Milo ran. He couldn't fight them head-on. He had no weapon strong enough. But he could lead them away from the heart root. He dashed through the side tunnels, twisting and turning through roots and rocks. One scavenger followed him closely. The other stayed behind. Milo ran until he reached a narrow gap between two stones. He slid through just as the scavenger tried to grab him. The large alien got stuck for a second. Milo picked up a heavy rock and smashed it into the enemy's head. The scavenger fell to the ground, unconscious. Milo panted, his body shaking from fear and effort. He didn't stop. He turned back to the main path, knowing the other scavenger might still be near Nera's entrance. When he reached the stone door again, he saw the second scavenger standing in front of it, trying to break the vines. The alien had a torch and was burning the roots away slowly. Milo crouched behind a rock, thinking fast. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last glowing seed Nera had given him. He whispered the sound he had heard from her, soft and deep, like the wind through trees. The seed began to glow. Milo tossed it toward the scavenger. The seed hit the ground and cracked open. A burst of green light exploded from it. Vines shot out of the walls, wrapping around the scavenger. The alien screamed as roots pulled him into the wall. In seconds, he was gone. The forest had protected itself. The door to the heart root still glowed faintly. Milo waited. Then, the stone shifted again. The door opened. Nera stood there, breathing hard. Her eyes were full of tears, but she was smiling. Behind her, the tunnel glowed with soft green light. The roots moved gently, as if alive. Milo stepped forward. "You did it," Nera nodded. She looked changed, stronger. Her body still looked fragile, but her spirit felt powerful now. She held out her hand. In her palm was a new seed, larger, brighter. She looked toward the forest and whispered something. The light from the seed rose into the sky, passing through the mountain. A pulse moved through the earth. Trees far away would feel it. Plants would respond. The forest was awake. They turned back and walked toward the cave. When they returned, the survivors looked up in surprise. The elder's eyes filled with light as she saw the seed in Nera's hand. She knelt before her. The others followed. Nera looked confused at first, but then understood. She was not just one of them now, she was chosen. Milo stood behind her, silent and proud. She had faced the trial, and she had passed. Milo sat quietly near the fire as Nera spoke with the elder and the other survivors. Her voice had grown stronger. The others listened to her with respect. She was not just a rescued girl anymore. She had returned from the heart root. She had passed the forest's test. Now she was seen as a guide, maybe even a future leader. The seed she brought back, glowing with soft green light, was placed gently in the center of the cave. Vines slowly grew around it as if guarding it. The forest was already changing. The trees above the cave entrance had grown thicker. The air felt heavier with life. It was clear the planet had begun to respond. Milo watched all of this with quiet wonder. He had come to this planet as an explorer. He had expected trees, animals, maybe some ruins. He had not expected a living forest, glowing seeds, or a rabbit-eared girl with the courage of a warrior. Nera walked over and sat beside him. She placed a small fruit in his hand, round, purple, and soft. He raised an eyebrow. "This safe?" She smiled and took a bite from her own. Milo followed, and the taste surprised him. Sweet and cool, like berries and rainwater. He nodded in approval. Nera looked up at the roof of the cave and then pointed toward the valley. "Go," she said softly. Milo understood. It was time to return to what was left of her village. The next morning they set out together. A few other survivors joined them. 3 young warriors and the elder Lyra. Each carried a simple tool or weapon made from crystal wood, bone, or vine. They walked slowly, following the same path Nera and Milo had taken before. But this time, it felt different. The forest seemed to watch them. The trees whispered in the wind. Birds flew overhead in silence. Milo noticed that some vines moved slightly when Nera passed, as if bowing in respect. After a few hours of walking, they reached the edge of the burned village. The smell of ash still floated in the air. Blackened wood, broken tools, and shattered homes were all that remained. Nera stepped forward alone, her eyes scanning the ruins. She walked to a stone near the center, once the heart of her people's gathering place. She knelt beside it and placed both hands on the cracked surface. The others stood in silence. Milo looked around the village. It had once been beautiful. Curved homes shaped like hollow trees, paths lined with glowing flowers, hanging bridges between branches, now all gone, but not forever. Nera stood up and turned to the group. "We rebuild," she said clearly. Lyra nodded. "Yes. We start again." The survivors moved quickly. Some began clearing broken wood. Others searched for anything useful. Nera walked through each part of the ruins, remembering where homes had stood, where children used to play, where songs were once sung at night. Milo helped too. He used his survival knife to cut vines, clear paths, and lift fallen beams. Though he didn't understand their words, he understood their work. As the day passed, the sun moved higher. Sweat rolled down his back. His hands became sore, but he didn't stop. This place mattered now. Not just to Nera, to him, too. While lifting a heavy stone, Milo spotted something strange beneath it, a metal plate. He called Nera over. She knelt beside him and brushed away the dirt. The plate had scavenger markings on it, symbols of a raider, clan known across this region of space. Milo had seen their signs before on other planets. They were slavers, hunters, and thieves. They did not care who they hurt. Nera touched the plate, then looked up. "They return," she whispered. Milo's face grew serious. "Then we prepare." That night they returned to the cave and spoke of what they found. The villagers listened carefully. They knew the enemy would come back. The drones had not returned. The girl had escaped. The heartroot had been awakened. The scavengers would not let that go. But now they had something the enemy did not. Connection. The forest was alive, and it had chosen to protect its own. Nera stood before the group and held up the large glowing seed. "We fight with the forest," she said. Milo stepped beside her. He pulled out the seed she had given him before. It still glowed, waiting to be used. He pointed to the cave walls where the roots had started moving again. "We don't fight alone." The next few days passed quickly. The survivors worked harder than ever. Some planted seeds near the edge of the village. Others built traps using forest vines and sharp stones. A few young ones learned how to hum the old songs that could wake the trees. Milo trained a few of them in basic defense. How to move quietly, how to hide behind stone and branch, how to use the land. He had learned these tricks on other missions, but now he taught them with care. These people were not soldiers, but they were brave. Nera trained too. She practiced with her staff, moving through the trees with speed. The burns on her legs had faded, healed by forest medicine. Her steps were firm now, her eyes sharp. At night they sat near the fire and made plans. Milo drew maps in the dirt. Nera marked the weak paths where enemies might come. Lyra shared old knowledge. Tunnels under the hills, hidden caves, paths that only the forest knew. On the fifth night, a whisper came from the trees, a message carried by the wind. The scavengers were near. The next morning, smoke rose on the horizon, again. But this time the village was not afraid. This time they were ready, and at the center of them stood a girl who had once been tied above a fire, but now held the fire within her, and beside her stood the human who had cut her down. The sun was just rising when Nera stood before the great tree known as the heartroot. Its thick trunk stretched high into the sky, covered in glowing green vines that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air smelled fresh and alive. Birds sang quietly. In the branches above, Nera took a deep breath and placed her hand on the tree's bark. It felt warm and strong beneath her palm. She closed her eyes and whispered a soft sound in her own language. The vines slowly parted, creating an opening, just wide enough for her to step inside. Milo waited outside, watching nervously. He wanted to go with her, but the elder Lyra had said this trial must be done alone. Nera had to prove her spirit was true to the forest. Nera stepped into the tree's hollow. Inside was a wide chamber filled with glowing roots that twisted and curled like snakes. The light was soft and green. A warm breeze moved through the air even though there were no windows. Suddenly the roots began to move. They reached out like hands, wrapping gently around her arms and legs. Nera did not struggle. She stayed calm and closed her eyes again. Voices whispered around her, soft but clear. They told stories of the forest, of growth, pain, and life. Nera saw visions of her people living in harmony with the trees. She saw the day when the scavengers came and burned the village. She felt the pain of loss and the hope of return. Then, the roots tested her. They showed her fear, darkness closing in, being alone and powerless. They showed her anger, flames, and destruction. Nera faced all these feelings without running. She opened her heart to the forest and promised to protect it. The roots relaxed. The chamber filled with light. A soft voice said, "You are chosen." Nera opened her eyes. In her hands was a glowing seed, larger and brighter than the others. The heart root had accepted her. Outside, Milo heard a deep breath. The great tree shifted as if alive. Birds and animals gathered nearby, sensing the change. Nera stepped out slowly, glowing with a new light. She smiled at Milo and handed him the seed. Together they returned to the village. The elder Lyra took the seed and placed it in the center of their camp. Vines wrapped around it and began to grow faster, protecting the village. Milo looked at Nera with pride. She had faced the trial and won, but the danger was not over. The scavengers were still coming. The morning sun cast a soft golden light over the valley. The village, once broken and burned, now hummed with life. Vines had grown thick around the homes. Flowers bloomed in colors Milo had never seen. The heart root's glowing seed pulsed, gently in the center, its light reaching out like a shield. Nera stood tall, her silver fur shining in the sun. She looked stronger now, full of hope and power. Milo stood beside her, his eyes scanning the forest edges. The scavengers were coming. He could feel it. The sound came first, a distant rumble of machines. Then the sky darkened with ships. Black, metal shapes hovered above the trees, their engines loud and angry. The scavengers had returned, but the village was not the same as before. Nera lifted the glowing seed from its place and held it high. She whispered the old song of the forest. The vines around her moved like living arms, wrapping around trees and rocks. The ground trembled underfoot. Milo watched in awe as the forest began to awaken. Roots burst from the soil. Trees shifted their trunks. Strange glowing beasts appeared from the shadows. The forest itself was alive and ready to fight. The scavenger ships fired lasers and dropped explosives. The ground shook with blasts, but the vines caught missiles mid-air and twisted them apart. The glowing beasts attacked the machines with sharp claws and teeth made of light. Milo joined the villagers in defending the village. He taught them how to hide and strike. They used traps made from the forest's own strength, vines that whipped and stones that rolled like thunder. Nera led the charge. She moved like the wind, her staff glowing with power. The other survivors fought bravely, inspired by her courage. The battle raged for hours. The scavengers were strong and well-armed, but the forest was stronger. Slowly, the machines were destroyed. The ships retreated, smoking and damaged. The valley grew quiet. Nera stood among her people, breathing hard but smiling. Milo looked at her and said, "You saved your home." She nodded. "We saved it together." The villagers cheered, their voices rising in song. The forest echoed back, alive and free. Milo looked up at the stars that night and thought about the journey. He had come to a strange world as a visitor. He had saved a girl who seemed weak, but she was not weak. She was the heart of a living world, and together they had changed the fate of a planet. Milo knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning.